Welcome, Jochen, at this conversation about the Atlas of Furniture Design.
Thank you.
Before we start, I would like to get the book here and show it to the people who might not have it, so they know what we're talking about, right? At home, we call it the brick.
Yeah, makes the camera shake.
Yeah, it's quite an impressive book. And well, there's only one thing that immediately strikes me with a book like this. Why?
Well, the idea to make this book goes back quite a ways, almost 20 years, I would say. After the museum, the Vitra Design Museum, had been founded in 1989, one of the first exhibitions that were extremely successful was a show of 100 pieces from our collection of industrial furniture design called 100 Masterpieces. And that was shown here in Weil am Rhein, and then it traveled internationally for a number of years. And the catalog to this exhibition, by the same title, 100 Masterpieces, had to be reprinted many, many times and in many different languages. So it was very successful. And already in the foreword to that catalog, the founding director of our museum, Alexander von Fegesack, had expressed the idea that his wish, that at one day we should really do an atlas that covers much more of this stunning collection. So the idea had been out there for a long time. And when Matteo Krise and Mark Zentner, our directors for the past, say, 10 years, took over, they gave this idea a new push and said, well, that's something we want to undertake now, because there are many books on furniture design around. If it's these types of anthologies, I would say, and I hope I'm not hurting anyone, a lot of it is coffee table books with pretty pictures, but not with much of profound information. I mean, we have it all here. We have the pieces here. We also have a large archive that relates to the manufacturers of these pieces. So there's a great treasure trove to source from.
Yeah. So it took more than 20 years to complete this whole enterprise, I'd say. I can imagine during these 20 years, and you're investigating, and design is, moving on as well. So you almost keep on updating. What were the biggest challenges in the realization of this book?
Yeah, well, I should say that the actual work on the book took about 8 years, which is still a long time. And a team of just in-house at times of up to 6-7 people, and then many people working outside of the museum on it. Well, the first big challenge, of course, was to really select the pieces. The collection of the museum comprises, in terms of furniture, about 7,000 pieces. So even though we're covering 1,700, a selection had to be made. There was a board, the director and the curators and the people and the editorial board of the book spending a lot of time looking at pictures of the pieces in the collection and trying to select what is most important across those 200 years that we're covering in the book. Then you mentioned it towards the end of the project of finalizing. There was, of course, again and again the question, we had some new pieces coming into the collection. Are we adding these? We always try to. Of course, also to keep it up to date and to have pieces in there that really are up to the shortly before the book was published. One key issue there was that in this book we have numbered each single one of these 1,741 pieces. The first one is number 1 and the last one 1,741. So at one point, once we had numbered them in the layout with many cross references from one piece to another, we just couldn't add another one, because then every subsequent piece would have had to be renumbered with all the cross references too, and that would have killed us. So at one point that just made us stop.
Yeah, at a certain point you have to stop. But the collection of 7,000 pieces, I guess the collection is being refreshed and being renewed all along.
Yes.
It's a living collection.
Yeah, it's constantly being added to. It's a collection that's based on the private collection of Rolf Filbaum, also founded and initiated the museum, and has grown ever since. And there's a board of curators and directors and collection managers meeting 4 times a year to discuss new acquisitions.
Jochen, if you look at the collection of, for example, musea, each museum has its own distinct collection and they have a focus. If you take, for example, the collection of the Centraal Museum in Utrecht in the Netherlands, they strongly focus on Rietveld and Rietveld only. Or if you take, for example, the Kunstmuseum in The Hague, they focus on the style. So all the colleagues of Rietveld and designers afterwards. What distinguishes the collection of the Vitra Design Museum?
Well, there's actually at least two answers to it. So one is that the focus is really on industrial furniture design. And there's no time limit or geographical limit to that. We're really collecting pieces that we think have been an important contribution to industrial furniture design. We have, particularly since the Atlas has been published, but also already before that, really sort of reframed the collection policy to say that our collection really comprises elements related to interior design. So actually, furniture design was the starting point of our collection, and it's still by far the largest and most important part. But the collection also comprises textiles, tableware, decorative items. So it's lighting design. So it has really become broader. Within that collection of furniture design, one can still tell, and that's something we also found confirmed working on the Atlas, is that because it was based on the private collection of Rolf Filbaum, one can still sense some of his personal favorites and interests, his heroes. Foremost, of course, the Eames, two of the most important furniture designers anyway, but also the Altos, Jean Prouvé. Then there's a strong emphasis on tubular steel furniture, bentwood furniture, plywood furniture. So there was a strong interest on this, kind of engineering part, and how new treatments, how new materials or new treatments of materials have informed new shapes.
These interests, I'd like you to elaborate on that, of all the new materials that were being invented, all these new production techniques. How did you incorporate those into the book? Not only by showing all the different pieces, but there are also diagrams and all different sorts of information. So how did you add the specific view on industrial furniture design?
Yeah, we really wanted this book to be very encyclopedic. So in the presentation of the furniture, it's very straightforward. You have 3 categories of pieces that only define how much space we're devoting to them and how much information we reveal about them. But then we have also 4 essays that draw a bigger picture to offer some context, social culture context within of the time within which these pieces were designed. And then we have a number of diagrams, information graphics, on certain materials like plywood, on the cantilever chair, and how that has developed, because it was one sort of ideal for designers to create from the 1920s on. First executed in tubular steel, and then later also by someone like Panton in plastics. We have a diagram on pieces that followed this ideal of creating a chair from just one sheet of plywood by making incisions and then shaping it in different ways. And then there's also an annex to the book that offers a glossary of the different types of materials and manufacturing methods, from which we again refer back to the different pieces that illustrate those.
One of the most interesting of these diagrams, in my opinion, was the whole history of the monoblock. And the monoblock is a type of furniture, you don't regularly identify with musea or Vitra for that matter. Why did you choose to incorporate the monoblock, this plastic, or at least the archetypical monoblock, this plastic piece of furniture, almost like a throwaway piece of furniture?
Yeah, well, we included it because obviously it's the one type of chair that's being sold the most. It's the cheapest way to produce a chair, because it's all in one go, one mold, and you take it out of the mold and you sell it, and that's why you can sell it for €5. And it's true, it's almost a trash item and almost treated like trash by many. Yeah, by the sheer quantity, we found it important, and we've also found it important because if you look at the diagram, then you see that there's been many different attempts at creating such a monoblock, and some of them are actually quite beautiful. I mean, those don't sell at €5. They're a bit more expensive, but still a lot cheaper than a lot of what has been done elsewhere.
There's a strong hierarchy in the book. As you mentioned before, some pieces of furniture are given more attention and also more space, like a spread, and some only have one page, and other chairs they're with 10 or 12 a piece on one page. I would have loved to sit in at the discussions you probably had of which furniture piece was to be given 2 pages or 1 page, or just like just a reference with 10 others on a page. What were the criteria to divide those chairs?
Well, that's hard to nail down in a few words. It was quite a process that actually took 1 or 2 years as the book was, or as texts were already being written. I think that there was of course, there is. I mean, we're not working in a vacuum. There is already a certain canon, which pieces are important, which classic pieces. So those were already. It was clear that those would deserve two pages each, and no less. Then there was also the attempt to make sure that really all of the very important furniture designers were represented in this first category with at least one piece, and then other similar ones could be relegated to a smaller category just as reference pieces. And the attempt to also get kind of an even spread, because across time, because things are ordered chronologically. To really have this even spread across the decades.
But what I want to know is, at any point, did the discussion get emotional? I mean, emotions can run high if we're talking about icons and what is an icon and what is not.
Yeah. Well, I have to admit that in these first 2 years when these decisions were made, I wasn't this deeply involved yet, but I never heard of any quarrels. Another thing actually that eventually influenced the decision on what goes where was that it happened while the texts were already written or being written, that we found, well, oh, this is actually a really interesting piece. There's a story behind it that we didn't consider before, and that's worth being told, and maybe it hasn't been told yet. So we actually moved it and said, well, this needs more space. And there were other cases where we thought, oh, this is a really interesting piece. This should be the first category. And then we weren't able to retrieve enough information to really say something substantial about it. And then those had to be moved to a say lower category.
Yeah. You referred earlier to a lot of the books that are being published on design, which are coffee table books, or at least they function as, like a visual glossary of what design is. Actually, the first few lines in the atlas is a quote of the philosopher Bruno Latour. I'm quoting here: "To design is always to redesign." Why did he choose specifically that phrase, and why is it so important in the context of the atlas?
Well, that quote was chosen by our director Matteo Cries, who wrote the foreword to the book. So of course I cannot speak for him, and I haven't actually asked him. My personal interpretation is to design is to redesign. It serves as a wonderful introduction to a book that will also hopefully serve as a source for future furniture designers who are also not working in a vacuum, but of course also looking at what has happened before and trying to create something new, more suitable to their times by taking furniture design or design history in general into account. And again, the same goes for the book. I mean, we've created this book looking at earlier encyclopedias of furniture design. So in a way, this was also a redesign, and you always try to improve on what has been there and to make it better.
Yeah, especially the chronological overviews I find very interesting to see that at the same time, for example, the first skyscrapers in New York were being built. What sort of chair did erupt at exactly that time? So the setting of design in its chronological context is one of the key focuses of the book.
Yeah, I mean, that's really important. And as you mentioned, the relation to architecture, for instance, because of course many of the early furniture designers were trained architects, and they designed furniture for the buildings that they designed because there wasn't anything around to their liking, so they had to make it themselves. So you have that connection, and that's maybe also going back to your earlier question about quoting a philosopher in the introduction to a book on furniture. What we're always aiming to do is to speak about furniture not only in terms of aesthetics, only in terms of form giving, but really as furniture as an expression of its time, of the values that were around, and that then also shaped other things in the man-made landscape.
One of the more intriguing maps, had a lot of maps in the book as well, because it's design, especially these days, it's a global discipline. But one of the most intriguing maps I saw in the book was of the migration of different designers traveling all around the world, and with that also exporting ideas. And that was sort of the first time when design was becoming a global discipline. Mm-hmm. Why did you choose to do that in a map? You could have done you could have written a book in itself about that migration of designers, but you choose to do it in a diagram and not in a text. Why?
Well, we thought it was very fitting for an atlas of furniture design to have a number of maps in the book, actually. There's also maps that show the connections between certain designers and manufacturers in countries like Italy or the United States or in Scandinavia, for that matter, to give you a sense of where the main centers of productions are, and to also praise the important manufacturers. in this field. And this map, that's really a personal sort of favorite of mine, because as you say, it really very nicely illustrates what an international business design is, and how creativity really thrives on international exchange. And I think, I mean, especially nowadays when so many countries sort of pull back into themselves and close borders, and I think that's a very good example of how important it is not to do that, but to keep your borders open and to exchange.
In the making of the book and doing all the research, did you discover as a museum and as a collector, the museum as a collector, did you discover that there were, so to say, holes in your collection that had to be filled? Did you acquire new pieces while doing research for the book?
Yeah, there were holes that had to be filled, and actually the one that immediately comes to my mind was that all the information about the monoblock that was really found by one of my colleagues in the process of making the book. Henri Massonnet, actually, a Frenchman, developed the first monoblock chair in France, and in the process we acquired some materials of his work and actually some of those pieces. Yeah.
I read in the press release of the book, among all the other astonishing figures, that there were more than 70 people involved in the making of this book. Not to be rude, but what did they do? 71 people on working on one book.
Well, 70 authors, really wonderful experts on the different designers, architects, and types of furniture, who we chose specifically for certain pieces to write about them, and wrote wonderful articles. But in many cases, they still left a few details or a few questions open. And one of the questions we struggled with, for instance, were we wanted to convey the information not only when pieces were designed and first introduced to the market, but also when production ceased at some point because they didn't sell anymore or tastes had changed. Which is why we also bothered and bugged many archivists of furniture manufacturers to find out these details for us. And yeah, this is just a moment to thank also the authors as well as these archivists who helped us out in finding this information that in many cases may be conveyed in this book for the first time.
If we look at the atlas, there are 4 chapters. This book is divided in 4 chapters, each of 250, roughly 250 pages. You could also say there are 4 books in one. And what strikes me of the 4 chapters, that the first one is early modernism, that goes from 1780 to 1914, so the beginning of the First World War. Then there's modernism, which goes from 1940 to 1940, another start of a war. And then there's the post-war area of 1945 to 73. I think late 60s, early 70s was also a revolutionary time, more like a social and cultural revolution. And then there's, of course, after that, the postmodernism until now. Do you, let's put it a bit blunt, do you agree with me that it could very well be possible that we're entering a new phase now because of digitalization, globalization, climate change? Well, I could go on, but just let's stick to these 3-4 global trends.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, yeah. I think one could have started sort of a 5th chapter maybe about 10 years ago or so. Yeah.
I feel a new book coming here, or am I mistaken?
Possibly so, yeah. Who knows?
Yeah, we probably have to rest first for a couple of years after this this gigantic enterprise. Thank you so much, Jochen, for this conversation, and also your explanation of this amazing book.
Thank you, Jeroen. It was a pleasure. Thank you.